Hello and welcome to cafetography.co.uk, and today we're going to take a close look at something very interesting indeed. Sigma's new 18 to 35mm f1.8 DC HSM lens. It's available for Canon, Nikon and other lens mounts, or rather it's been unavailable as Sigma are having trouble meeting demand for this lens right now. It's really been the talk of the town because it's the fastest SLR zoom lens ever made. Its revolutionary design lets you zoom from 18 to 35mm while retaining a very fast maximum aperture of f1.8. It lets in over twice as much light as an f2.8 zoom lens and over 4 times as much as the typical lens that comes with your camera. That's really astonishing, and it means two things. As you can see here, the amount of light an f1.8 aperture lets in is great for getting still shots or video anywhere that's dark, so it's especially great for shooting indoors at parties or other events. With such a very wide aperture, you can get really fast shutter speeds for sharper pictures and for stopping action. And secondly, the fast f1.8 aperture means you can get a really out of focus background, as you can see here. This can make your subject stand out from your background a lot more, and it gives your photos more depth, making them look more professional. You can get some really impressive pictures at f1.8. The only drawback is that, in order to get such a very fast aperture, Sigma had to limit the zoom range to 18 to 35mm, which is pretty small, so it's basically a wide-angle zoom lens. And you might also be able to see that the lens has no image stabilization, so your video footage might look slightly shaky. But for many photographers, that's a small price to pay for a lens that lets in so much light. Let's start by taking a look at the lens's build quality. The lens isn't designed to work on expensive full-frame cameras, but it's still pretty big, especially compared to something like Canon's kit lens, but unlike any kit lens, it has a luxury feel to it. Its body is made of metal, so it feels great to hold and extremely sturdy, although it might be a little heavy for some people. The zoom ring is quite firm to use, but it's extremely smooth and well damped, turning evenly, so that's a bonus for video work. And the focus ring also works beautifully. Like the zoom ring, it turns very smoothly, which is perfect for precise focusing. The lens has full-time manual focusing, so you can turn the focus ring even if it's set to autofocus. Unlike cheaper lenses, the front element stays still while you're focusing, which is a professional touch and very helpful to people using polarizing or graduating filters. The autofocus isn't amazingly fast, as you can see here, but it works silently, and it's also very accurate. From time to time though, the autofocus misses completely, and you get a shot that's very soft, but that's pretty rare, and compared to some of Sigma's older lenses, the accuracy has greatly improved. All in all, the lens is pretty hefty, but it's built fantastically well. It's a real pleasure to use. Well, let's look at the all-important picture quality. Most f1.8 lenses are a bit soft when you're shooting at that bright maximum aperture, and Sigma had the added challenge of making this a zoom lens. So there was always going to be a question mark in people's minds about this lens's potential image quality. But as we look closely, there's a pleasant surprise in store. At 18mm and f1.8, the lens is, unexpectedly, extremely sharp. Even more surprisingly, we can see that the corners of the image are very sharp too, until the very extreme edge of the picture. This is a really impressive performance for any lens at f1.8, let alone a zoom lens. The only downside is that you can see a tiny bit of chromatic aberration, or colours on contrasting edges, which is also known as colour fringing. But even that isn't too bad. If you stop the lens's aperture down to f2.8, the corners become even sharper, and at f4, the picture quality is as perfect as you could ask for, except again for a hint of chromatic aberration. When we look back in the middle, the image remains wonderfully sharp. Frankly, this is an astoundingly good performance for any camera lens. Let's zoom the lens all the way in and look at the quality at 35mm. At that lovely wide aperture of f1.8, you might be able to notice that the picture quality is just slightly less sharp than it was at 18mm, but it's still very impressive indeed, and there's plenty of good colour and contrast to keep the picture looking great. If we look over in the corners, the sharpness is just as good. Unlike at 18mm, there are no problems with chromatic aberration. The image is extremely clean. If we stop the lens down to f2.8, then we're back to the land of razor sharpness. It's even sharper than Canon's own 17-55mm f2.8 zoom lens, which is very highly regarded. This picture quality is amazing in the corners, and equally perfect in the centre of the image. So what we see is something that no one could have expected. An amazing optical performance, even at f1.8. Let's take a look at some other optical issues. Take a look at the straight lines in this picture, taken at 18mm. You might be able to see a very slight curve, which means the lens is exhibiting a mild amount of barrel distortion. This is actually much less than on a normal zoom lens though, probably because of the more narrow zoom range. Zoom into 24mm and the barrel distortion goes away, turning into mild pincushion distortion at 35mm. Frankly, these levels of distortion are better than average for a zoom lens and hardly noticeable in practice, so it's a great performance. You might be able to see in the corners of the image that there is a little darkness, also known as vignetting. Again, it's actually a bit less than you'd normally see on a lens with such a fast f1.8 aperture, and if you stop the lens down to f2.8, it mostly clears up. So that's not a bad performance at all. Take a look at this footage and you'll see that the lens also works okay against bright lights. There's a little bit of lens flare visible, but no real loss of contrast, so that's a pretty average performance. Something incredibly fun and useful about this lens is that it can focus very closely to your subject, whatever that might be. Combined with a wide angle and wide maximum aperture, this means that you can get some very creative shots that other lenses can't really provide. The close-up image quality is a tiny bit soft at f1.8, as you can see here, but stop down to f2.8 and everything is sharp again. Those close-up shots really make the lens a lot of fun to use. Finally, the quality of this lens's out-of-focus backgrounds, or the bokeh, is really smooth, even at the widest angle of 18mm. Here you can see that the out-of-focus areas look very soft indeed, so they don't distract you from your subject. That's a big deal for any of us, as one of the best things about an f1.8 lens is its ability to get out-of-focus backgrounds, so you want them to look nice. Overall, Sigma seem to have done what no one else could have expected. They've designed a revolutionary new camera lens, which is beautifully built, but which also offers the same kind of fantastic picture quality that will astonish even the meanest of critics. You'll just want to shoot at f1.8 all day long with this lens. Obviously, the zoom range of 18-35mm is slightly limited, and video makers might miss image stabilization. But one look at the image quality will have you hooked. More experienced photographers, who especially know the value of an f1.8 aperture, will probably appreciate this lens the most. But the Sigma 18-35mm f1.8 DC HSM is an astonishing achievement in anyone's book, so obviously it comes very highly recommended.